welcome to room 3. Today we're going to talk about registration with printmaking, in particular silkscreen and how to get your silkscreens to print nice, centered, and neat every time. The technique we're going to discuss today is known as flop registration, and I'm going to walk through a few steps that will hopefully allow you to start printing with more accuracy and less guesswork, which will allow you to spend more time creating art and less time trying to figure out the finicky details in registration. Follow me. Hi everybody, welcome back. Here we are to keep going with flop registration, and I'm going to go through the next few steps here. So essentially for flop registration, you're going to want to have a couple of materials and pieces that you'll need to make sure that everything works smoothly. You're going to need your transparency right here that was actually used to create your silkscreen. And you're also going to need just some basic computer paper, roll of tape, and your printing paper. The large surface here is just a great big piece of construction paper. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to tape that down onto the table, center it as well as you can, so it's not going to move anywhere. Secondly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my printing paper onto the construction paper here. On top of that, I'm going to be putting my print where I want it to land. So, sorry, this isn't your print, but rather your transparency. And essentially, your transparency is going to be the same size and exactly the same details as your print. So it's a really good way of lining up and getting a good sense of what your print will look like. So I'm going to be eyeballing this because for me, for this particular print, I'm okay if it's not exactly to the millimeter where I want it. I just want to make sure that wherever I set it up, that when I print, every time it's going to land in that place. So by doing this, I can ensure that consistency. All right, so I've got my print, my transparency centered on my printing paper. I'm now going to add the component that gives this type of registration its name. This is the flop. So just by taping on some basic computer paper here, got a little bit of hair on the tape there, I'm going to stick the computer paper down and just tape it onto the transparency, and then the other side here I'm going to stick to the paper, which should allow me to flop this transparency back and forth. Flip, flop. There we go. Alright, so I've still got my transparency, my image centered on the paper. The flop is secured in place. I'm happy the way things look. At this point, I want to get my pencil out and then just mark the corners where the paper is sitting right now, so that I know each time if my paper sits on these marks and my flop doesn't move, that every time that flop should land in the same place, and that's going to give me consistency, hopefully, in my printing. Please, when you're making marks with your pencil, be super careful to get as close as you can with the pencil without actually touching the paper. That would be definitely a violation of the printer's code. To be getting any marks in your paper is to be avoided at absolute all costs at any given time in printing. So that should be good in terms of getting this first step lined up. Next step I'm going to get to will involve the silkscreen. Stay tuned. Okay, part 2, here we go. That's a silkscreen we've got with my images ready to go, and we need to continue to get this part of the registration sorted out. So this is what we do. So we've left off here with our paper centered, our pencil marks in place, our flop registration secured. Now we need to add the silkscreen to the mix, and what we want to do is make sure that now the screen is going to land exactly where the flop registration is landing. And it's really hard probably to see with the camera, but I actually, with the naked eye, you're able to get in quite close here and line things up and even push it down a little bit on the screen to get really accurate. This particular print that I'm doing right now in this demonstration is based on a Andy Warhol self-portrait concept, which students are going to be doing. Right. That looks pretty close though. So at this point, what I want to do, just like I did with the paper, marking where the paper is going to land, I'm now going to mark where I want my silkscreen to land with some nice big L marks here with my pencil, and just a straight line at the top because I'm kind of running out of room on the paper. Okay, and I can lift off my screen, and at this point I should also be able to take the flop back. So the idea now is that I don't need the flop there anymore, and I don't want to print on it anyways because then the ink won't reach the paper. So the idea is that if I now put my printing paper where I've marked it with the L's, and then I put my silkscreen on top on the same marks. And just a couple more things to get straight. We need to tape down our paper, so we've got it lined up on these marks here that we made earlier. I'm just going to take a small piece of masking tape, make sure that it's secured. If you're actually going to be including all of the paper in your final print, you'd want to use a painter's tape so there's no risk of it tearing the paper, but I know that I'm actually going to be tearing my paper when I'm done to make a square format for my final print, so I'm okay with using regular tape there. Alright, so the idea is we are no longer needing the flop because we've already got everything lined up, and I can now begin to line up my silkscreen here, and what I'm going to do is put a little piece of tape under that screen so that when I put the ink on, that I can get things lined up. I can flood my screen without worrying about the ink coming through. When I'm ready to print, I'll take the tape out and push it down. So I've got a nice little pot here of Scarlet printing ink, right? Nice, real warm, sort of orangey red, hoping that'll look good combined with a rich black. So what I'm going to do here is I'm printing the first two prints in total, and the first one is going to be my lighter color, which is my fill color, followed by black, which will come later. So when I'm doing a screen print, I want to make sure that I use my spatula and I make sure it's clean, which it is, and I'm just going to lay down a nice thick bead of ink, a couple of inches from the top of where the actual print is going to be pulled from. Okay, that looks like a good amount of ink for this print. For now, I'm just going to put the ink pot aside here on scrap paper. I'm not going to close it yet because it's got a lot of ink on the sides and I don't want it to get gummed up in the lid. I'm also going to put my spatula down here on the scrap paper, and I'm going to flood my print. Here's a squeegee. So this is a rubber squeegee. And the idea of flooding a print is that you don't want to print directly onto the paper the first time you pull the ink through. You want to pull it down, and then you can bring it back up once more. You could print from the first flood, but I like to double flood, especially on the first go. So I'm going to be flooding this. Normally I might want an assistant here to be holding the screen, but this is a pretty small screen, so I should be able to handle it. So I'm going to be pulling the ink across the print. There we are, and then I'm going to pull the ink right back up, and I'm going to just, right where I started, I'm just going to knock it a little bit just to get a little bit of the ink off there. If there's a fair bit left on the squeegee, I can take my spatula and actually scrape a little bit of that excess off. Okay, there we go. So I'm ready to pull this print. I just want to take my tape out, and this is where I just want to make one last check to make sure that my screen is lining up on those corners that I drew in with the pencil and the line on the opposite side. Everything looks good, and I can now firmly press down on the screen. I'm going to bring my squeegee down to the screen above the ink. I'm at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to pull in a fairly smooth with a fair bit of pressure. I'm not going to push too hard, but enough that I'm going to push the ink through, and one fluid motion is the idea, and let's see what happens. Okay, when I'm at the bottom, I'm just going to tap it very gently. I'm going to pull my screen up, and I'm going to reflood my screen rapidly. There we go. It's actually taking a lot of ink, this one. So I'm going to have to flood it 3 times. There we go. Okay, now I can see that the ink has gone through. And there we are. We've got a print. And I'm not going to say it's the nicest print I've ever pulled. There's a couple of issues with this print. It looks like the screen might have slid a bit. In fact, it might be a little bit damp still. It might have rushed the drying process a bit, but you can see the idea. The print has gone through onto the paper. It's centered, although a little bit shaky. Got to do better. I'll keep working at that one and get back to you for the next step. Thanks for watching, everybody.